Hello, I'm your host, David Barnard. Today's conversation is shorter than usual and will be featured in RevenueCat's State of Subscription Apps report. Each episode in this series will explore one crucial metric and share actionable insights from top subscription app operators. With me today, Brandon Gador, product lead for growth at Onyx Maps. On the podcast, I talk with Brandon about why product is the key to monetization, the psychology of value perception, and the often overlooked impact of simply reminding users that they're on the free plan. Hey, Brandon, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave, for having me.
So I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. I think a lot of folks in the subscription app industry don't know about Onyx. It's kind of this sleeping giant. Not as many folks in Silicon Valley or just in tech broadly are into hunting and fishing and outdoor hobbies. And so they just don't realize what a great business Onyx is. 400 employees, millions of users. It's a pretty amazing app. And the thing I wanted to focus on today was increasing monetization through a combination of targeted upsells, premium features, and then I do want to dig into also subscription tiers. Let's get that first one out of the way. Like, how do you think about targeting users with that right upsell, with the right feature to improve conversion?
The most important thing, and this is like true for any product, is like the product really has to be solving a problem first. And so you can't like bring monetization in if there isn't like value that the user's finding that they're willing to pay for. So I think like before you can even start to think about monetization and those elements, like the product market fit and is this solving a problem that users, deeply care about that they're willing to pay for is the most important thing. I think it's just important to start there when you're thinking about monetization is like the product market fit and is this product really solving a problem?
And for folks who are struggling with monetization, that really is genuinely like the first troubleshooting step is like understand with users, is this a product solving a problem or at least something people are willing to pay for? So if you build a gimmick, like, yeah, maybe you're going to monetize a little bit, but there's a lot of product problems that are upstream of monetization problems. So I think it's a fantastic place to start.
Like the next layer to that is really thinking about like, well, what is the monetization strategy? And having kind of a clear line of sight of that. And so, is it a trial type app where you're really trying to drive users into trials to experience the value of the product? Or is it more of a freemium approach where you're just trying to gobble up a bunch of free users and then convert them over time? And I think like having a clear strategy there really informs a lot of kind of like the following motions and the metrics you start to optimize. And so those two elements are like what I would, make sure that are solid first before then you start diving into some of the monetization pieces.
On freemium versus free trials, I know within Onyx Maps, which is actually kind of unique in the industry, y'all have 3 or 4 different products, and some of those products have different strategies around whether you are just gobbling up users with the freemium strategy or doing the free trial strategy. And so you're kind of in a unique position working at a business that itself operates in multiple models. So I'd love your insights on why freemium or why Onyx chose it for the different products.
What's really unique about our growth team at Onyx is that we're a horizontal team. And so we actually work across all these apps that are at different stages of their life. And so the Hunt app is the most mature. It's been around the longest. And then the Backcountry app is actually the newer of the apps that we have. And then even within that, so you have this maturity stage of the business and like the brand awareness. And so that definitely plays a factor into it. But then you also have like, well, what is the competitive landscape in these different areas? And in the Hunt space, the competition is radically different than in the Backcountry space where you have a much more, I'd say a lot more freemium type products. You have more kind of casual use as far as if you think about All Trails or Strava, for instance, where there's more repeat usage over time. Where like hunting is very seasonal. There's specific seasons when you can go out and get out in the woods. And so that really plays into the strategy around how we think about what we're optimizing for when it comes to monetization.
So then where does the rubber meet the road on converting those users? And how do you think about that next piece of monetization?
First and foremost, you need to be educating users that what is part of the paid tier. Like, a big, I think, learning that we've had is that users didn't even realize that they were in the free experience. And so sometimes you just need to make it like really obvious that like, hey, you're part of a free product here and here's kind of the value that you're missing behind the paywall. And so I think education is like the first motion, I'd say. And that's education around the paid tiers, but then even around the features themselves. And so a thing we've been experimenting a lot with is just like education within the features, trying to communicate the value to the user. What are the outcomes that we can drive for you as the user by, upgrading into one of our paid tiers? That's a great place to start. And so how are you playing with what features that users have access to over time? And really trying to understand what is the particular feature or the user outcome that is most going to drive users to want to pull out their wallet and upgrade into one of the paid tiers and really experience the value of the product. And so playing with the access that users have to some of these features and be willing to experiment with that, because I think you can have an idea or a strategy up front around this is the basket of things in our paid tier, but I think you'll probably learn a ton if you start experimenting with that.
Getting that freemium mix right is what can really drive a product forward. So I think it's a kind of an under experimented with aspect of freemium subscription apps, is actually moving features in and out of that freemium experience to figure out what's retaining people and what's actually driving monetization. So fantastic tip.
The previous podcast of yours that I love is the Headspace podcast, and they talk about their journey down this path. And I reference that podcast all the time because I think it's a really fascinating case study of how they played with access over time around their free user base. And then when it comes to monetization, like I think the third area I'd consider is, you have these upsells, you're trying to drive traffic to a particular paywall. Now you're at paywall, optimization. And I think that's another really critical area for teams to think about as far as like the traffic that you're driving. I know in your podcast, you often talk a lot about the paywall view rate and really increasing that. And that's like one of those levers to really think about is like, take freemium, for instance, like how often are your free users actually seeing the paywall, and what are the motions you can do to increase the paywall view rate, as well as then like setting up capabilities so that you can run a lot of experiments, pending volume, but like run a lot of experiments on that actual paywall and really, optimizing that. If you think about the things that we've been talking about, like education, feature access into the paywall, and like what is that end-to-end journey for the user and how are you connecting all those things? There's some really interesting things to experiment and explore in those themes.
I actually read recently that Duolingo is getting some backlash from free users because they are getting more and more aggressive about pushing people to the subscription. So how do you think about balancing the trade-off of like annoying the free users and potentially causing churn, but then, hey, it's a business and we do need to monetize?
It goes back to the monetization strategy. And I think like if you are, let's say you're deploying a freemium strategy and you want to have this large pool of free users over time, well, you're going to think about different things if it's like really a trial-based product and we just want people to take the trial. Another thing that kind of helps distinguish on that strategy is like the TAM, like the overall opportunity. If there's a really large TAM, like you mentioned, like Duolingo, you can afford to probably have, millions and millions of free users. Whereas for some of our products, it's more niche. And so like, specifically like in Hunt, it's much more of a trial strategy because that TAM isn't like, everyone out trying to learn a new language. Another thing that's helpful to get aligned as a team when you're working in this area is like, well, what are the metrics that we're optimizing for? And then how do we think about the guardrail metrics of if you want to be mindful of not pushing people away, how are you thinking about repeat usage? How are you thinking about uninstalls? Are you monitoring tickets into your customer support team, app store reviews? How do you get that holistic view of the user experience so that you are, because at the end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, we had to communicate a lot to our users that you actually were in a free product. And sometimes like you have to get in front of them and it is going to be disrupting. But I think in that case, like it was important to educate our users that you're actually missing out on all this value.
One of the things that I think Onyx does really well is that you are monetizing those free users well. And then as a more mature product, you do now have multiple tiers. How do you effectively use that to kind of target the less expensive tier in certain cases where maybe they're not going to get the full value, but then those like super diehards, you want to make sure that they can pay you as much as they're willing to pay?
My advice, for the app builders out there is like, until you really have a clear user need around an additional tier, when is the opportunity to bring it in? Because I think like by introducing it too early, it introduces all sorts of complexity into the business. And it ends up being, I think, more work than it's actually worth when you have a really clear, hey, this is our paid tier. You have different durations of it. And that becomes a really easy choice for the user to understand around like, what are they paying for? And so what really works well with the Hunt tiering package is that like it's baked in a user problem around the access that you get across the country. So we have our premium product, which is 1 state. We also have a premium 2 state package. And then we have our top tier, which is elite, which is access to all 50 states plus Canada and Mexico. I think from the user's perspective, it's really easy for them, coming into onboarding, seeing the paywall, they can grok like, okay, I can understand the value or the difference between these different tiers. Whereas if it's just kind of a basket of features in the different tiers and you've kind of sliced and diced it by like an idea that you had, I think it's really tough for the user to understand what's the difference between these two and the value within them.
In that elite tier, I know y'all have created some partnerships and added a lot of value, like discounts to other brands and things like that, that are actually really attractive. And again, something that Onyx can do as a much more mature product, as a bigger company. But this is the kind of thing I think a lot of people can be thinking about when you think about how do we add value? Well, adding value isn't just that next feature you build. You can add value through partnerships and through so many other ways. So tell me how Onyx does that.
This is a great point around how we think about like the elite tier. And there's been a constant effort around how do we round out the feature set and the value that we could provide our users within our highest paying tier. And so, our elite price is $100, which is a lot to ask for in the App Store.
Which is funny because I kind of don't think it is in a way, because I think y'all still have a ton of room to grow monetization. Because I know a lot of hunters here in the Texas area. And I mean, you'll spend thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars a year on this hobby. So yes, if for an app it's expensive, broadly, probably not.
Exactly. And I think it's in the context of the user and like what they're spending for their hobby. So you're totally right. But I think in the mindset of like paying, you're in the App Store and you're paying like $100 is a lot at the time. And so a part of that strategy has been like, how do we broaden the feature set and capabilities in our elite package? And one component of that is the partnerships with brands. And so as an elite member, you get a discount or some sort of like extra value with these partners that we have. And to your point, these hobbies are really expensive. And sometimes the deals that you can get on these partners can make up the value of the app in a single purchase. So you're exactly right.
Do those partnerships also play into growth at all? Like when you partner with an outdoor clothing line like Camo and all that kind of stuff, do they help promote the app?
Yeah, exactly. To give you like an example, in the hunt product, we partnered with First Light. And so First Light is an outdoor apparel company. And so there's a lot of kind of cross promotion that happens between those two brands that, First Light being a premier outdoor apparel company, when people see Onyx next to that, that association happens there. And so we do a lot of kind of cross collaboration with these brands to help drive growth.
What a great win-win where you're able to deliver value to your users and create those extra incentives for the premium tier, but then you're also driving some extra growth and brand awareness through these partnerships. Any other specific examples around targeted upsells that you think the audience would be interested in?
One of the areas where we probably learned the most around these targeted upsells, and kind of to your previous question around like how do we find that balance of not being intrusive in the experiences. Well, one is like, how do you bake it natively into the experience? And like anytime you can naturally have that upgrade flow or that CTA as part of like the natural user experience, like that's where we've seen success. And as far as the user experience, because it's not like a jarring interruption. But I'd say another like really critical part of this is like the strategy is like the who and when. And so who are the cohorts that you're targeting, and being really thoughtful around the specific cohorts and being able to target on kind of different vectors. But then the when and the context, and like how you think about the context of the user. Did they recently interact with a particular feature? How long have they been with the product? And I'd say it takes both of those. You need the who and the context to really be working together to be most impactful here. I think the last part of that is kind of how do you carry that through into the experience of the upgrade and the context of the value that you're communicating to the user when you've gotten them to kind of start that journey of the upgrade path. And I think AllTrails does a really nice job of this with some of their upsells where, for instance, like if you're a free user and you interact with the 3D part of their map, now the paywall actually has this great highlight video of 3D, and it's giving you the value prop of 3D. And so it kind of goes back to that end-to-end user experience I was referencing earlier, is like, how are you having that continuity through the entire upgrade is where you'll see the most impact.
This has been so much fun, Brandon. I think there's so many tips folks can take away. Anything you wanted to share as we're wrapping up? Is the team hiring or anything else you wanted to share?
No, I mean, first off, thank you, David, so much for having me on the podcast. Like, I'm a huge fan of the work that you all are doing, and I've learned a ton from the different guests that you've had. So I really appreciate everything you do there. I mean, last thing I'd say is like, Onyx, these are purpose-built products for folks that are trying to get out in the outdoors. And so whether you're a backcountry skier, a hiker, an off-roader, or you're curious about hunting, check out some of our apps. They're pretty amazing products. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me today. This is so much fun.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks so much for listening. If you have a minute, please leave a review in your favorite podcast player. You can also stop by chat.subclub.com to join our private community.